The Prophet Muhammad was more than just the founder of Islam. Born around 570 AD in Mecca, Muhammad came from the Quraysh tribe, and his family was actively involved in politics and trade. Mecca as a whole was a center for trade and religion, and boasted a variety of temples where the many nomadic tribes throughout the region would worship their gods. Allah was believed to be the greatest of these gods, but many tribes were actually polytheistic. Muhammad's parental grandfather, Abdul al-Muttalib, was a leader within his own tribe as the chieftain of the Hashim clan. Abdul al-Muttalib was a beloved leader, and when Muhammad was brought into his care around the age of 6, the chieftain taught his grandson the fundamentals of his duties in politics and statecraft. Sadly, Muhammad's grandfather passed away in 578, putting Muhammad into the care of his parental uncle, Abu Talib, who was a simple merchant. When he reached his teens, Muhammad began to work for his uncle as a shepherd and accompanied him alongside his caravan to places even as far as North Syria. Over time, through his travels and work, Muhammad earned himself the nickname of Al-Amin, which means essentially, the one you can trust. Unsettled by the religious life amongst the surrounding Meccan tribes, Muhammad would often leave for long periods of time to go into a mountain cave away from the town to fast and pray. As it is said, in 610, during one of these retreats, while meditating in a cave on Mount Jabal al-Nur, Muhammad was visited by the Archangel Gabriel, who Muhammad believes recited to him the words of God. It is debated between historians whether Muhammad first kept these words and this event to himself, or if he immediately felt compelled to speak about the situation to other potential believers. Muhammad initially told his wife, who believed him, and then his close friend Abu Bakr, who also believed. Soon, Muhammad began to tell more people and grew a small following of believers. Due to the fact that his message was strongly monotheistic, condemning the worship of other gods, the polytheistic tribes of Mecca were angry at Muhammad and his growing audience. The issue with this message was not only one of religious beliefs, but it also posed an economic problem. Muhammad spoke out against idol worship, which impacted the merchants who served the thousands of pilgrims coming to Mecca every year for worship. Some of these merchants were even from Muhammad's own Quraysh tribe, and they quickly began to try and convince him to give up his preaching. The Quraysh tribe also attempted to uphold a trade ban against Muhammad and his followers, almost subjecting them to a famine, and an assassination attempt on Muhammad was even tried. When Muhammad still refused to abandon his preaching, he and his people, a few hundred by this point, were eventually forced to emigrate to Yathrib in 622. The leaders of this town had invited Muhammad in hopes that he could bring their bloody civil war to an end, and the name of the city was eventually changed to Medina, meaning the city of the Prophet. Here, Muhammad continued to grow his audience and build his first Muslim community over the next 6 years. During the span of 624 through 628, the tribes from Mecca became violently displeased with Muhammad's increasing success and resorted to military action. 3 skirmishes were fought between the Meccan tribes and the Muslims: the Battle of the Badur, which the Muslims won, the Battle of Uhud, leaving the Meccans victorious, and the Battle of the Trench and Siege of Medina, which gave final triumph to the Muslims and led to the signing of a new peace treaty between the warring sides. The fighting began when the head of the Umayyad clan of the Quraysh tribe, Abu Sufyan, was escorting a wealthy merchant caravan that Muhammad himself wished to raid. He organized a group of 300 men, a mixture of both his Meccan and Medina supporters, and led them into battle himself. This decision came after new revelations led Muhammad to sanction aggression against the Quraysh tribe of Mecca in response to their brutality and persecution of the Muslims. Muhammad's first technique was to draw out Abu Sufyan, and his forces was to fill the wells along the caravan's route with soil, forcing the Meccans to end up at Badur, where the battle began. First, in a traditional manner, 3 men from each side were chosen to engage in the opening struggle, and then the remainder of the armies charged towards each other. Muhammad, leading his side, picked up a handful of dust and threw it at his opponents, filling their eyes and noses and giving his men the upper hand from the very start. In a stunning victory that led the Muslims to believe even more in their recent divine sanction, Muhammad's 300 men defeated the roughly 1,000 men led by Abu Sufyan. The second contest, the Battle of Uhud, was fought the following year in 625 at a valley near Mount Uhud. The Meccans, led by Abu Sufyan, wished to avenge the previous embarrassing loss they had suffered at the hands of the Muslims. Once more, Abu Sufyan and his troops vastly outnumbered Muhammad and the Muslims, with the former having roughly 3,000 men and the latter fighting alongside less than a single thousand. Still, the Muslims fairly quickly received the upper hand and began to rout the Meccan forces. They likely would have even won the battle if a disastrous mistake had not been made by Muhammad's archers. Ignoring their commander's orders, the archers left their posts. This allowed Abu Sufyan's cavalrymen, spearheaded by Khalid ibn al-Walid, an experienced veteran of the Meccan troops, to ambush the Muslim forces and wreak havoc throughout Muhammad's side. The Meccans slew a vital amount of the Muslim soldiers and severely injured Muhammad himself. The Muslims were forced to retreat up the mountain, and the Meccans took that as a signal of their ultimate victory. They deemed themselves triumphant and left, leaving Muhammad and his troops to pick up the pieces from this calamitous and unexpected defeat. The final battle between the Muslim and Meccan sides was the Battle of the Trench and Siege of Medina. Despite their recent victories, the Meccans decided that their men alone would not be enough for the next conflict in 627, racking their troop numbers up to 10,000 men by convincing a large sum of tribes to join their fight. The Meccans finally began their march to Medina. Unwilling to lose again, Muhammad opted for a new tactic this time. Instead of marching to meet his adversaries for a direct face-off, Muhammad held his men back and ordered a ditch to be dug around the town after the idea was suggested by Salman, a Persian convert. This was completely unheard of by the Meccans or the other Arab tribesmen and totally caught them off guard. As the chaos began to spread throughout the Meccan tribe, the portion of the army eventually crumbled and left only the Meccans themselves to insist on pushing forward with the siege. Muhammad and his forces, through their use of surprise strategy, ultimately won, and the Meccans fled after their siege failed. Muhammad took advantage of this win and the fact that the Meccans were growing weary of the ongoing war and its economic effect on their own city. Following a dream that led him to do so, the Muslim leader began a new march towards Mecca to perform a pilgrimage with about 1,400 of his followers. Still not recovered from their second troubling loss to the Muslims, the Meccans refused to allow Muhammad to enter the city. Before he could attempt entry, they sent a delegation to meet the Muslims and negotiate a deal. This deal resulted in a peace treaty that solidified the Meccan recognition of Muhammad and his followers as equal religious and political entities. The pact called for 10 years of peace between the opponents and the guarantee that if he halted his current pilgrimage, Muhammad and his followers could return the following year during a 3-day span where the entire city of Mecca would be cleared for the Muslims to perform their religious duties. By the start of 630, allies of the Meccans had already breached the new treaty, and Muhammad was not interested in upholding his end of the bargain. In January of that year, the Muslims marched again to Mecca and gained the support of more and more tribes along the way. By the time they reached the city, the Meccans were fully aware of the fact that they no longer had an advantage of power and allowed Muhammad to take their city with little to no resistance. Many of Mecca's citizens even began to convert to Islam, and the Muslims had become the dominant community in Arabia during only a short amount of time. Over the next 2 years, Muhammad returned to Medina where he remained a resident, although he continued to work towards uniting the entirety of the Arabian Peninsula under Islam. Finding great success in his endeavors, he returns to Mount Arafat in Mecca to give his last sermon during the spring of 632. Tens of thousands of supporters joined him on his final pilgrimage before he went home one last time. Muhammad fell ill shortly after arriving in Medina and succumbed to his sickness on June 8, 632. With the death of Muhammad came a new era of Islam. The Prophet's teachings were spread across both Asia and Europe, and the time of Muslim empires and conquerors was only just beginning.